All right, what's up, everybody? We're going to get started in just a second. I am hoping to finish this up with some time to spare. So if you use the Whova app, please ask some questions, rate some questions, so we can have a little bit of a discussion and debate today, because I do have a very controversial thesis to offer all of you. Wow, quieted it down once I said controversial thesis. It's controversial, but it's also very optimistic. And the controversial thesis is, I think there is a greater than 95% probability that animal liberation occurs in the next 40 years. 95%. Controversial, right? But also optimistic. But I actually want to start with a report from the front lines. Many of you know that I work with a lot of undercover investigators, open rescue teams. And this report is particularly grim. So I want folks to kind of bear with me about these details. If you're concerned about seeing or hearing disturbing things, this is not going to be the talk for you. Here's the report. Y'all ready for this? We have broken into Elon Musk's lab, Neuralink, and we could see a single primate, a macaque. She's being prepared for an experiment. Through a single crack in the vent, we've placed a camera that sees everything. Through that lens, it is as if we've gone through a portal to hell. The macaque is pinned down with arm and neck restraints. A power drill is on the table next to her. Soon, they will drill metal rods into her head so they can access her precious brain for experiments. She screams and thrashes, but she cannot escape. Suddenly, we hear a noise in the hallway. A light turns on, and three men with grim faces appear. They stare at us, shocked by our presence. "How did you get here?" one shouts. This is the point the team has been dreading. A direct confrontation between the animal abusers and the animal rescuers at the very point of violence. But then, something surprising happens. The men with grim faces all flee. One jumps over a gate and crashes through a window. Another pulls open a latrine cover and crawls through the sewer. The third leaps, grabs onto a railing above him, and squeezes through a hole in the roof. "Stop!" I yell as I run after the men. But they've disappeared into the night. "Call it in." Within an hour, dozens of ambulances stream in, and EMTs rush into the facility. The macaques are gently coaxed two at a time into the back of spacious medical trailers with bedding, food, and water. Their babies are placed in special heated trucks. Trained staff stay with them, offering infant formula to help them recover from trauma. Helicopters airlift a few to a local hospital to receive emergency intensive care. Within 4 hours, all the animals at Neuralink have been saved. This is a report from the front lines. The year is 2060. 5 years ago, every nation in the United Nations signed a universal declaration of animal rights. And today, we are shutting down the last animal abuser on Earth. So now you know this is not real life. This is a story. But it's not just a story. It is a prediction. And the prediction is this: within one generation, every animal on Earth will be free. So you might be thinking to yourself, has this man gone insane? That wouldn't be a terrible assessment. I just got out of jail. I'm a convicted felon. I've lost basically every job I've ever had, so I'm maybe not in the best position to make predictions. I also have dog poop on my pants, which doesn't make for the most credible presentation. So if you get closer, you can still see the dog poop stains. But I don't think I'm insane, because despite the fact that we've seen, and this is the number we all look at, right? This is roughly number of animals killed for food, which, it's a rough approximation, is a total number of animals killed by human beings across the planet. We see these numbers skyrocketing up until the year 2023. But I'll tell you what, I'm not insane, and here's why. This is another graph that also looked very bad in the year 2015. I was in Berkeley, California, working very hard on fur campaigns, doing investigations. We did an open rescue at a bunny farm. And people said the same thing about the fur industry. They said, look at these numbers. It's looking terrible. 2014, we're hitting a record high. Highest ever in the United States, 3.8 million pelts in a single year. And let me show you the next graph. Within 5 years, fur production fell off a cliff. We banned fur, not just in Berkeley and San Francisco and Los Angeles, but in the entire state of California, which is the 4th largest economy in the world, right above Japan, right underneath Germany. And the reason we did is because we looked at the right metrics. And I'm going to show you some of those metrics today, the metrics that matter. Because too often we look at individual consumer behavior. And I'll tell you right now, if you look at the picture in terms of individual consumer behavior, my prediction does look insane, because individual consumer behavior is not going the right way. But individual consumer behavior is not the be-all and the end-all of social change. Instead, back in 2016, the year before fur collapsed, a bunch of activists in California, some of the smartest people I know, people way smarter than me, got together and drafted what we call the Roadmap to Animal Liberation. And we made a prediction in this roadmap that fur would fall off a cliff based on the metrics we were seeing. But the metrics were not consumer behavior. The metrics were these: institutions, culture, and movement power. So I want to talk through these 3 things, and then we can have a little debate. I encourage all of you to try and challenge me on this. Let's actually come up with the best arguments against my thesis and see if I'm actually right. Let's start with institutions. So when I got started as an animal rights activist in 1999, I have to say, veganism was not really a thing. Farm animals are barely even a thing. And I give a lot of credit to people like Josh Balk, Paul Shapiro in the United States, a lot of incredible activists in Europe, people like the animal quality folks, Jose and Sharon, for making farm animals a thing. But when I graduated from law school in 2006, exactly 20 years ago, so I didn't want to guess, in the United States, which has, I think by all accounts, one of the strongest and most powerful farm animal movements today, but 20 years ago, how many state farm animal welfare laws existed in the United States? Who wants to guess? Throw out a number. Close. One, and it actually just passed. So this is from ChatGPT, but this is confirmed. There are actually 2 laws that have been passed. One went into effect, a gestation crate ban in Arizona. So mere 20 years ago, there was exactly 1 state farm animal welfare law in the entire country. Anyone guess how many state farm animal welfare laws exist today in 2026 in the United States? Throw it out there. What do you think, Billy? Yeah, so optimistic, but it's 44. But very importantly, it's not just that there's growth. Roughly from 2001 to 2010, there were about 5. From 2010 to 2020, there were about 10. And just in the last 5 years, we've seen another 16 laws passed. Over and over again, institutions, when they're actually challenged on the abuse of animals, are forced to change. So going back to fur, why did we think the fur industry was on the brink of collapse? Because we were starting to see not individual consumer change, but institutional change. It turned out when there was actually a clash of beliefs, when the fur industry brought out all of its best arguments, its lobbyists, its stories, and they came out against our best lobbyists, our best stories, our arguments, they started losing. It started in West Hollywood in 2011. This is just a small note. This is, I think, the entire article, just an AP small report. We saw this in West Hollywood, and we went to Berkeley, California, and tried to do the same in 2017. We saw something pretty interesting, that the arguments were actually turning people, that the people in power realized they could not justify skinning animals alive. They could not justify a cruelty that was based on profit. And not only did we win in West Hollywood, in 2017 we won in Berkeley, in 2018 we won in San Francisco, in 2019 we won in LA, and then 2020 we won across the state of California. And increasingly, we're seeing these sorts of changes spread not just across the fur industry, not just across experimentation, but farm animals as well. And here's the other note I'd make. If you look at the history of social justice, when you start achieving institutional change, it often, in fact, almost always, rapidly accelerates. And the reason for this is institutional change builds on itself. Once one institution has been converted, it creates positive feedback loops that drive others to change as well. Because after all, if Stanford has adopted a plant-based policy, why shouldn't Harvard? If West Hollywood has banned fur, then why shouldn't Berkeley? And as you can see from this graph that was compiled by Bloomberg News, in virtually every important political movement in the United States over the last 100 years, once you start getting legislative victories, it rolls like snow down an avalanche. All right, so this is point one. Institutions are transforming. So point two, culture. So there's a very interesting experiment that's been formed by a very renowned psychologist named Paul Bloom. He used to be at Yale University. He's now at the University of Toronto. But he's done some of the most extraordinary research on moral psychology. And I actually presented this experiment to you last year. Does anyone remember me telling you about this experiment last year at this talk? Okay, so the experiment goes like this. He just goes to a representative sample of Americans. It's not just Yale undergraduates, so it's people all over the country, and asks them, there are two boats that are sinking, and no one can swim in either of the boats. On one boat, you've got a pig, another boat, you have a human. Which boat do you save? You don't want to guess what percentage of Americans decide to save the pig? It's not that high. I think most of us, at least by the logic of animal agriculture and exploitation, would say it's probably zero, right? But about 1 in 10. 1 in 10 Americans already choose the pig. It's about 7%. But about 80% choose the human. Interestingly, when you switch to your pets and you ask the person, would you save your dog over the human, what do you think the percentages are then? It's about 50-50. At least with respect to our companion animals, speciesism has been eradicated. So this is a sign of cultural shifts. But interestingly, Paul Bloom just released another study. It's actually just a few months after I spoke at VARC last year, that expanded upon this finding, because it's a little bit of a conundrum. If 1 out of the 10 Americans would choose a pig over a human, 1 out of 2 Americans would choose their dog or cat over a human being, then how is it that we have so much violence? And what Paul Bloom has found is a lot of this is culturally ingrained speciesism. Because it turns out when you look at young children, they don't have the same intuitions. They're much more likely to say 50-50 even for the pigs. You can look up the study later if you'd like it. Okay. So maybe the best example of the cultural transformation we're going through is with respect to animals in experimentation. Because frankly, the most comparable actual real-world scenario, and I'm sorry for those of you who disagree with this, but to me, the most comparable real-world scenario to this hypothetical Paul Bloom posed is animal experimentation, because I think there are some limited areas, sorry, don't bite my head off. There are some limited areas where I think animal experimentation probably does save human lives. I'll give you an example. My dad, again, don't bite my head off for this. My dad performed experiments on animals for diabetes. And some of the insulin that he developed saved human lives, and it was developed with pigs. Oftentimes they extracted it directly from pigs. So there actually is a real-world parallel to this hypothetical, and it's medical experimentation. But where we've seen public opinion on animal experimentation since 2001, very consistently declining support, very consistently increasing or declining support for the industry, and increasing support for animal rights. And when Gallup has dived a little deeper into this, not only have they found that this is one of the few moral issues, and across a whole range, gun control, abortion, one of the few moral issues where we have seen consistent changes, but the driving force has been young people. Young people. Young people increasingly see animals in cages, and they want them out. Okay, so what does this tell us? This is just one example of how the culture is shifting. If you just took a straight line graph, in other words, if we just did as well as we've been doing over the last 20 years, over the next 20 years, animal experimentation almost certainly will be gone within the next 20 years. Okay? Believe that. It's important. Okay. So third point, movement power. Okay, so this is actually, interestingly, also published in the year 2006. 2006 was a year where we had one farm animal law on the books in the United States. We also had this very famous advertisement placed in the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. Does anyone know what this is about? There are probably some people maybe even involved in this campaign back in the early to mid-2000s. What is this about? Shaq. And what's Shaq? It was a campaign against vivisection, in particular one of the largest contract research facilities in the world, Huntington Life Sciences. And when folks went into the facility, did some property damage, did some direct action against secondary and tertiary targets, the public and the authorities rapidly turned against them. And this is not just an advertisement. This is a very successful campaign by the government and the industry, not only to demonize activists, but to send people to prison for a long time. So I think Tom Harris is here at this summit. Dear friends of mine, Josh Schwartz, Lauren Gazzola, spent multiple years in prison because when we actually were forced to fight in a court of law with the industry, very often we lost. I want to tell you another story about breaking into animal experimentation facilities that happened in 2017. We did a lot of things 20 years after the Shack campaign, very similar to what they did. Direct action, breaking into facilities, taking dogs out. But you know what happened after we did in 2017, what Shack did 15 years earlier? How did the authorities respond? How did things unfold in the court of law? Anyone know? What did the authorities do? Well, initially they charged us, so it felt a little bit like the Shack days back in the early 2000s. But within 1 year of the charges being filed against us, we so effectively campaigned, the public was so effectively turned against the industry that the most important publication in all of science reported on the fact that the tables had turned against Ridgeland Farms. They were now charging Ridgeland after we broke in the facility and took out 3 dogs. Okay. So increasingly, when the movement is having fights with the industry in courts of law and institutions and in public opinions, we have the capacity, we have the skill, we have the strategy to win. And this matters immensely. When you read about the history of social movements from people like Marshall Gantz at Harvard, one of the most prominent sociologists in my country, over and over again, what they find is when movements develop what he calls strategic capacity, the ability for large numbers of people to solve very complex problems on a dime. Because the world evolves. There's new challenges every day. And if we have the intelligence to solve those challenges, we can win. And what we're finding over and over again in courts of law and in the court of public opinion is that when animal rights activists have a fight with the industry, we are not being sent to prison. We are not being called terrorists. We're being called heroes, and we are winning. Let me give you some examples. This is Alexandra Paul, my friend and co-defendant, who decided to walk to the back of a slaughterhouse truck in broad daylight, record herself taking chickens out of the slaughterhouse. So Alexandra took these 2 hens from a slaughter truck at the largest and most powerful poultry company in the Western United States. They have the single largest slaughterhouse in the Western United States. Incredibly politically influential, bought all the politicians. That company did everything they could to try and put her in prison. We went to a court of law in Merced County, where probably about 5% of the entire county works for this company. She won in court. She was fully acquitted by a jury of her peers. Here's another example. This is my friend Andrew Sharrow, who was a Cal PhD student, Cal Berkeley PhD student at the time. Now he works at Bain as a consultant. Andrew walked into the largest pig farm in the nation. I told you about this last year, Circle 4 Farms. He walked out with this little piglet, Lizzie, with blood all over her face. This is a county that was, frankly, even more politically unaligned with the animal rights movement. 1 out of 3 people in the county work for Smithfield Farms. 90% of the people in this county voted for Trump. When we went on trial to defend the right to rescue, we won. Again, movement power. And then, for those of you who don't know, what happened just a couple weeks ago. MBR Acres, everyone in this room probably knows, is probably the most prominent target in the vivisection movement in the UK. They have sent tens of thousands of beagles to torture and death, to be bled out, stabbed in the heart, and cut up for their organs. For decades, we have fought them. We have lost. We have not been able to prevail. But over the last few weeks, after activists broke into the facility and took beagles like this out, we have gone to the court of law, and we have won. A jury of our peers is now saying we have the right to rescue animals who suffer from abuse. And that is the abusers, not the rescuers, who should be heroized. Okay. And then there's even bigger victories in the court of law. Because it's not just trial courts, it's not just juries of our peers. One of the most important court cases in animal rights history unfolded in the United States just a couple years ago. Does anyone know about the Ross case? So the pork industry, which, for the record, anyone who knows U.S. politics knows the pork industry is, the reason we call it big pork, right? There's a metaphor, big pork, the largesse, the corruption of the animal agriculture industry, and frankly of Congress, we say pork barrel politics, is because the pork industry is powerful. The primary regulator of the pork industry I've talked to, a guy named Pat, who's a former head veterinarian, supposedly supervising animal welfare and health for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, He once told me, and then he repeated this in the New York Times, that no one dares go up against the pork industry, not even the U.S. government. Well, now we have to qualify that statement because someone did go up against the pork industry in the Supreme Court of the United States, and guess who won? We did. We fought to ban gestation crates, and even in front of 6 conservative Supreme Court justices, we convinced them that these animals don't belong in crates. Movement power. 20 years ago, there was one state farm animal law in the nation. 15 years ago, there were about 5. Today, not only are there 44 state farm animal welfare laws in the United States of America, increasingly, when we go into court, including the highest courts in the land, we don't just fight, we win. This is why animal liberation will happen in one generation. And I'll tell you again, I went back and looked at this original document, and I looked at some of the milestones we had. And I'm not going to read this all to you. It's too long. It's not a very good slide. I will tell you this. We looked at these 3 dimensions, institutions, culture, and movement power. And at least on 2 of these, on institutions, we did not actually think we'd get a fur ban until 2025 in California. We got it in 2020. On culture, we did not think the animal experimentation industry would be the place where it is today, where half of Americans want it banned, and even RFK Jr. and Marty McCary and Jay Bhattacharya are saying, this industry has got to go, and we are here today. Then one area where we need to grow, where I think we're not doing as well by the milestones we set back in 2016 when we drafted this roadmap, is movement power. But the key thing about movement power is it is partly based on our own conviction and belief. If we believe we can win, we will. If we have confidence, we will prevail. If we don't just dream of a world where every animal is free, if we fight with our own bodies, our own freedom, our own lives if necessary, to bring that vision to life, then animal liberation will happen. So I told you a story at the start of this talk, and it was a fictional story. This is actually a real image of a primate, a macaque, in a vivisection facility like Neuralink. But this is not just a story, because over the last few days even, I told you I just got out of jail. I told you I had dog poop in my pants, all of which is true, and I'll tell you a little about why. It's because not a macaque, but a little beagle was suffering torture inside of a cage. Her name was Julie, and for 2 hours, we saw her spinning inside this 2-foot by 4-foot metal cage. Some of the beagles at this facility have been trapped in a cage for 7 years, living on wire, never seeing the sky, never having softness or a hug or even a kind word their entire lives. So as I said, the story I told you of a number of actors breaking in and getting public support, it was a story, but it wasn't entirely a story, because we saw something very similar at Ridgeland Farms in Madison, Wisconsin, just a few days ago, and we did exactly what the activists in the story I told you at the start did. We saw this animal, we realized no one was coming to help, and we just started to go in and help ourselves, and this is what happened. So the authorities were called by us. So this story that unfolded last week, it didn't end the way the story I told you at the start of this talk did. We're getting pretty goddamn close, because I'll tell you this. Despite the fact that 27 of us were arrested, 5 of us were jailed, the prosecution, because millions of people protested the arrest of rescuers, including the director of Superman, James Gunn, the bro-in-chief of the United States, Dave Portnoy, a guy who normally tweets about MMA and people beating each other up. So many people came out to support us that the government declined to press charges to date. It is now facing so much pressure to shut down Ridgeland Farms. We just heard that they're going to be investigating and possibly seizing dogs over the last few days. We heard this. So this reality of a world where we are not criminals for rescuing animals, we are heroes, where the authorities do not cover up and support abuse, but help us get the animals out. This vision, this dream is coming to life. every single day, and you all are part of it. So thank you for the work you've done over the last 20 years. Thank you for what you're doing today. Animal liberation is coming, and it's coming far sooner than most people think. And if you want to follow us, go to simpleheart.org. All right, that's all I got. So who wants to challenge me? Anyone want to disagree with me now? Okay, I'm serious now. There's somebody in the audience who's skeptical, who's got something in their mind, who thinks we're not going to win in 40 years, and I want to hear those questions.